Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're going to my favorite mid-range plays for week 9 of the NFL season over on Draftkings. Also my favorite value plays video posted shortly after I posted this one. And also if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out and I really do appreciate it. Without further ado, let's dive right into it. So as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and the first and only quarterback I'm going to talk about here today is Justin Herbert, $6,800. He's just really the only mid-range quarterback I like Bridgewater, Cousins, Tannehill, Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger. Not super interested. Lamar Jackson, $6,900, but that's a tougher matchup versus the Colts, and Justin Herbert's just been absolutely awesome, and I like this game a lot for fantasy purposes. There's a lot of good plays in this game. We have Herbert, we have Justin Jackson, we have Keenan Allen, we have Hunter Henry, we have Josh Jacobs, and a couple other guys as well. So, big fan of this game, and Herbert, like I said, he's been awesome, and this should be a pretty solid game for fantasy. We have a 51.5 point over-under here, and only a 1 point spread, so I'm expecting this to be back and forth for the most part, and it should be a decently high-scoring game. And on the season, since he's taken over for the starting job for the Los Angeles Chargers since week 2, he's averaging over 300 passing yards per game, 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, and he's throwing the ball nearly 40 times per game as well. And this is a great spot versus the Raiders. They are ranked dead last on PFF and pass coverage this season. They're 27th DVA versus the pass, and they're 23rd versus quarterbacks, allowing a little bit over 22 DraftKings points per game. So Justin Herbert, I think he's in a great spot here, and the obvious pairings are Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry, and it's very easy to stack them together because Keenan Allen, he's expensive, but he's not like he's $8,000. He's only $7,000, which I think he could be a little bit more expensive, and Hunter Henry is basically free, even though he hasn't really been producing. He's still getting targets. And yeah, Mike Williams, too, is like a more of a contrarian option. He's always capable of making big plays as well. So Justin Herbert, it's a good spot. He is a little bit pricey, but I definitely think this price tag is deserved for how well he's been playing so far this season. And then moving on to the running back position, in the same game I was just talking about, we have Josh Jacobs at $6,300. This is kind of just a so-so matchup. Los Angeles is kind of just mid-range versus running backs. They're 18th DVOA, and they're allowing 25 DraftKings points per game, which is slightly below average, ranking 18th in the league. Only 73 rushing yards per game, less than a rushing touchdown per game, but it's kind of just all about the volume here for Josh Jacobs. And I actually think you can do like a Josh Jacobs, then Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry stack. I think that's totally viable. I do like this game a lot for fantasy. I already mentioned that earlier. But the thing with Jacobs is, I know he hasn't been super efficient this season with his touches, only 3.6 yards per carry, but he's getting volume each and every single week. That's not something we have to worry about. On 21 rushing attempts per game. Now, only 75 rushing yards per game, but the volume's there. He's also slightly involved in the passing game. A little bit less than 3.5 targets per game, but at least it's there and at least boosts his floor just a little bit. I know he's not getting like 6-7 targets per game like someone like Alvin Kamara, but he gets plenty of rushing attempts on the ground, and we should be looking at anywhere from around 20 to 30 touches in this game. Now, last week, it was a win game, so you have to factor that in, but he did have over 30 carries, and I mean, the volume is going to be there. He's a very talented running back. And if he happens to find the end zone, you'll probably be pretty happy with the fantasy points that he put out at only $6,300. Now, the next guy we have is David Montgomery at $5,700, and this is not a flashy play in the slightest. It never feels good rostering David Montgomery. It's just never really much of a fun time. But he's the only running back on the field for the Chicago Bears. Tariq Cohen has been gone, and he has just pretty much been the only running back on the field for this team. And he's getting plenty of looks in the passing game, which is always going to boost his floor. And at only $5,700, I don't mind that at all. Looking at his target numbers since a few weeks ago, he's been at 6 targets, 8, 5, 5, 5. The rushing attempts, they haven't been anything too crazy, and he actually hasn't topped 89 rushing yards all season long. But again, it's all about the volume here. He's also going to be slightly used in the passing game. And the matchup versus Tennessee, it's not that bad. They have not been that great of a defense versus the pass or versus the run this season. 17th DVA versus the run, but allowing 26.1 DraftKings points per game, which is 23rd, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game and a rushing touchdown per game as well. So David Montgomery, he's a fine volume play, but that's about as far as I would go. I wouldn't say this is an exciting play, just a strict volume play at a decent price tag. Now, the last running back I want to talk about is David Johnson at $5,600, and he's pretty much the same play as David Montgomery. They have similar numbers on the season. They're both averaging around 14.5 rushing attempts per game, and pretty much similar numbers through the air as well. David Montgomery's getting a little bit more work through the air, but still very similar plays here. But David Johnson, he's on a better offense with Deshaun Watson at the helm, and they have a higher team total, and they get a great matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. And they have a team total of nearly 28.5 this week, 15.5 point over-under, and they're 6.5 point favorites. So this game sets up pretty well for David Johnson. And also Jacksonville is absolutely atrocious versus the run. They sucked versus the pass as well, but versus the run, 23rd DVOA and allowing 30.2 DraftKings points per game to the position, which is 28th in the league, over 100 rushing yards per game and about a rushing touchdown per game as well. And they're also kind of getting beat up through the air by running backs, allowing nearly 7 catches per game. So David Johnson, who is a capable pass-catching running back, should get close to a handful of targets, and at $5,600, it's a good matchup. If he finds the end zone, which I actually think there's a decent chance he finds the end zone in this one, I think we'll be pretty happy at $5,600. And then moving on to the wide receiver position, we have Brandin Cooks at $5,500. Definitely like this Texans offense this week. I think Deshaun Watson, David Johnson, Will Fuller, Brandin Cooks are all good plays here. And Cooks has been getting a ton of targets the past 3 weeks. So 12 targets, 9 targets, 9 targets, also 33, 21, and 13 fantasy points. He's been a pretty safe option the past few weeks, and he gets a great matchup here versus Jacksonville, pretty much the worst pass defense in the league. DVOA-wise, they're dead last, 32nd DVOA versus the pass. They're more so mid-range versus wide receivers, they're 18th in the league, allowing 38.9 DraftKings points per game. But Cooks is a talented wide receiver. He's got Deshaun Watson throwing the football. And don't forget, just a few weeks ago, Brandin Cooks absolutely destroyed this Jacksonville Jaguars secondary. He had, 12 targets, 8 catches, 161 yards, and a touchdown on his way to 33.1 fantasy points. So, big fan of Brandin Cooks. Not saying he's going to do that exactly again, but this is definitely a great spot versus a very soft pass defense, and he's a very easy pairing with Deshaun Watson this weekend. All right, so this next guy is a pretty interesting play because this has definitely lost some steam due to the fact that Matthew Stafford is going to be out this week to do some coronavirus-related things. And that sucks because I was really hoping we were going to get some nice deep shots from Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones all game long versus a very weak Minnesota secondary. Now we're stuck with Chase Daniel, who I'm not really going to expect a whole bunch of deep shots from him, but he's still going to be throwing the football. Now, I know the Lions are going to prefer to run the ball here with Chase Daniel at quarterback, but he's still going to be throwing the ball some, and with no Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, Marvin Hall, Danny Amendola are all going to get a little bit of an uptick in usage here. My preferred options would be Marvin Jones and Danny Amendola, and I'll talk about Danny Amendola in the value plays video, just a spoiler alert there, but I still think we can have some interest in Marvin Jones just because he should operate as the wide receiver one in this offense, and he's got some talent. And I know it's a big downgrade not having Matthew Stafford throwing the football, but this is such a good matchup. I think he'll be fine at the price point, but the ceiling is definitely capped, I think. But they're still in the third most points per game to wide receivers and nearly 50 DraftKings points per game. They're 18th DVOA versus the pass, and they're allowing over 2 receiving touchdowns per game, specifically 2 wide receivers this season. So I like the matchup here for Marvin Jones, and as long as Chase Daniel isn't absolutely awful in this one, I still think he can have a decent game at $5,100. I just definitely think the upside is capped with no Matthew Stafford. In the third and final wide receiver I want to talk about is the glass man himself, DIONTAE Johnson at $5,000. If you roster him this week, just fully expect him to lead the game with an injury at some point because that's what he does pretty much each and every single week. And this kind of skews his numbers because if you're looking at his numbers this season, they're not going to look as impressive on a per-game basis just because when he starts a game and he leaves, it still counts as a game and it kind of hurts his overall numbers. Like right now he has a sub 20% target share, but in the games where he's played the entire game, which I know is just 2 or 3 football games this season, but he's had around a 30% target share, and he's been good in those games as well. And an interesting stat that I found is that he's actually averaging 0.26 targets per route ran, which is right up there with Robbie Anderson, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, DeAndre Hopkins, and Keenan Allen this season. So he's definitely getting targets when he's on the field and running routes. And this is a fantastic matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, one of the worst defenses I've ever seen. They're 15th DVOA versus the pass, which isn't terrible, but they are allowing 42.9 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, which is 27th in the league. And notice overall some very weak numbers. And when DIONTAE Johnson's on the field and healthy, Ben Roethlisberger loves getting him the football. I think he's a very talented wide receiver, and at $5,000, I actually think he's a very solid play versus a very, very weak Dallas secondary. And then finally, we have the tight end position. There's only one guy I want to talk about here, and it's Noah Fant at $4,600. And I actually think this game is sneaky for DFS purposes. You have a nice 50-point over-under here, and the Broncos are 4-point dogs on the road in the Dome in Atlanta, so we don't have to worry about any weather conditions here. And this is a very, very bad pass defense. They're nearly dead last versus quarterbacks. They're nearly dead last versus wide receivers, and they are dead last versus tight ends. So I think Drew Lock at his price point, which we'll talk about in the next video, at $5,200, he's definitely a decent cheap option this week, that's for sure. But Noah Fant, he's a very athletic tight end. He's got a 20% target share in the season. He had 9 targets last week, and when he's healthy, the guy is definitely a factor on the football field. And if you're looking at how Atlanta's done versus tight ends specifically this season, it's pretty bad. Overall, they're 29th DVA versus the pass, but they're allowing 19.1 DraftKings points per game to tight ends, which is dead last in the league, 66 receiving yards per game, and a receiving touchdown per game as well. So this is a great spot for I know a fan. At $4,600, I definitely think there's a lot of upside here. And if you do happen to use Drew Lock this week, Noah Fant's definitely one of the top options to pair him with. And with that being said, guys, that's going to be it for this video. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. Really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And I'll work on getting my value plays video up here on shortly. Then we'll have the lineup building video and the core plays video out tomorrow morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever I decide to do. Then we'll do the NASCAR video later tonight as well. So appreciate you listening, and I'll see you guys in the next one.